If you are new to chemistry at GCSE, this is probably one of the most difficult topics in chemistry. Um, the reason why it's so difficult is that you get introduced to quite a few concepts, which probably some of them would have been introduced at an earlier stage, but perhaps up to this stage you're still not sure what these concepts are about. And I'm talking about the concept of atoms, elements, compounds, atomic number, mass number, uh, and basically the subatomic particles which make up the atom. So it's important that you really understand what each of these what each of these concepts really represent as a fundamental idea of chemistry. And to start with, I'm going to consider atoms, elements, and compounds. And by answering a few questions, about four questions, we'll get to know a little bit about what each of them mean and how you can make it easier for yourself to really understand from the start. Because most of the problems that students have is that they misunderstand these concepts from the beginning, and in the end, all of them just look the same, and you don't know which is which. So, the first question is, what are substances made of? The second question is, what are elements made of? Third question, how do we represent atoms and elements? And the last question, what is the basic structure of an atom? To answer the first one, what are substances made of? That's quite easy. Almost everyone will tell you that they're made of atoms. So atoms are the smallest entity that makes substances. At this stage, when you look at solids, liquids, and gases, they are all made up of atoms. So atoms are like the building blocks of matter, and by matter we mean solids, liquids, and gases. So atoms, so each of these three different states of matter are made up of atoms. Atoms are like, if it was a building, then atoms would be the bricks, which probably are the smallest entity that makes up the building. And so that's what substances are made of. They're all made up of atoms. But what about elements? What are elements made up of? Elements are also made up of atoms. But the difference between elements and other substances is that an element is made up of only one type of atom. So it's only one type of atom which makes up the elements. And if you want to make it easier to remember what an element is, just think about the periodic table of the elements. The periodic table of the elements is made up of elements. So all of those substances which are on the periodic table are elements, and they are made up of one type of atom. So to be oxygen or carbon or fluorine or any other substance, gold for example, the element would have to be made up of just gold atoms. Okay, so the element gold is only made up of gold atoms. The element oxygen is only made up of oxygen atoms. The element carbon is only made up of carbon atoms, and so on. So if you look at the periodic table of the elements, then you know that each and every one of those is an element. Now, how do we represent atoms and elements? Well, we represent atoms and elements by using basically three items. The first item is the atomic symbol, which represents the atom or the element. The other significant representation of the atom and elements is the mass number, which appears at the top, just above, just to the left of the atomic symbol or the symbol of the element. Then on the bottom left, just on the left, you've got the atomic number. sometimes it's called the proton number, because the atomic number is actually the number of protons in the nucleus of the atom. And these, for a neutral atom which is not ionized, will also represent the number of electrons in the atom. So there's three things that make up an atom of an element. The atomic number, or the atomic symbol. For example, for carbon, it's just C. So C, capital letter C, would be the atomic symbol for carbon. And the mass number for carbon would be 12. And that 12 is found on the top left of the C, of the symbol C, which represents the atomic symbol. And the atomic number for carbon would be 6. And the 6 is just found on the bottom left-hand side of capital letter C to represent carbon. So all elements and atoms are characterized by having this symbol, a mass number, and an atomic number at the bottom. And what is the basic structure of an atom? Well, an atom is characterized by having a nucleus, which is quite small compared to the rest of the atom. If you think about a football stadium, if the center of the football stadium had a football in it, then the atom would represent the rest of the football stadium. So the rest of the atom, where the electrons are moving around, that would be represented by the rest of the football stadium. And that football in the center would have been the nucleus of that atom. And so that is the basic structure. So you've got you've got the nucleus in the center, which is quite small, and then inside the nucleus you've got neutrons and you've got protons. And the protons are positively charged and the neutrons are neutral with a zero charge. And the electrons would move it around on the outside of the nucleus. And these electrons they occupy a very large volume of, if you compare to the fact that the nucleus is very tiny, but you've got a very large space where the electrons are moving, and this large space is virtually empty space with just the electrons in them. And so you'd find that most of the mass of the atom is concentrated in the nucleus in the center. So the rest of the atom is empty space, whereas the nucleus holds most of the mass. So in terms of mass, we talk about the relative mass, and in terms of charge, we talk about the relative charge. So the relative charges are that the protons are positive 1, and the electrons are negative 1. The mass of the electron is quite negligible compared to the mass of the neutron and the mass of the proton. So the electron is normally given a relative mass of 0. Relative when you compare it to the other mass. In fact, the protons and neutrons are almost 2,000 times heavier than the electron. So these are the fundamental ideas of the atoms, elements, and compounds. And by the way, compounds are just composed of atoms of different elements. So and these have been chemically bonded together. So for example, carbon dioxide is made up of carbon and oxygen, 1 carbon atom and 2 oxygen atoms, and these make up the compound carbon dioxide. So a compound is made up of atoms of 2 or more elements, 2 or more different elements. You can have, for example, sulfuric acid, which is hydrogen, sulfur, and oxygen, H2SO4, 4 hydrogens, 1 sulfur atom, and 2 hydrogen atoms. So that sulfuric acid, that's another compound. So you can have compounds made up of the different types of, you can have compounds made up of more than two types of atoms, or two different elements. And so to recap all the ideas we've looked at for atoms, elements, and compounds, all substances are made up of atoms. Elements are made up of one type of atom. Compounds are made up of two or more types of atom and an element. And we represent atoms and elements by using an atomic symbol, a mass number, and an atomic number. And the basic structure of an atom is that it's composed of a very tiny nucleus surrounded by electrons. And in the center of that nucleus, you've got neutrons and protons. If you've got any questions concerning this video or any other video that I have made, you can put some comments or some questions in the comment section. Then maybe I can make another video, or I can improve this very video to just to add clarity to anywhere where you think that it's not been clear enough for you to understand.